Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Jonah Berger says you can change anyone's mind. Today, we'll find out how. Jonah, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Jonah, you've written a book, Catalyst, that I loved. I mean, on The Secrets of Success, we call that a dirty book because I've marked it up so much. I have so many arrows, underlinings, etc. Why did you write that book?
You know, it's interesting. I'm an academic, so I teach at the Wharton School. I've been there now for, probably 14 some odd years. Love doing academic research, but a few years ago, my life changed a bit. I used to do mostly research and teaching. I wrote a popular press book called Contagious that came out in 2013, and it gave me the opportunity to work with lots of companies and organizations. So everything from big Fortune 500s like the Googles and the Facebooks and the Nikes of the world to small startups. I learned a lot about marketing along the way. I have a PhD in marketing, but didn't, have a lot of experience in the field. But from working with all these organizations, I realized they all had something in common, whether they were a big company or the small one, whether they were B2C versus B2B. Even when executives were having troubles sort of, one-on-one, they all had something they wanted to change. Right? The marketing folks wanted to change consumer behavior and the sales folks wanted to change a client's mind. Employees wanted to change their boss's mind. Leaders wanted to transform organizations. Startups wanted to change industries. Nonprofits wanted to change the world. But again and again, it wasn't working, right? Often I would talk to people or teams or organizations that were pushing and prodding and trying to persuade, and it just wasn't happening. And so what I started wondering is could there be a better way? Could there be a better way to change minds and drive action that might be different from what most of us try most of the time?
Well, I think you've obviously done a great job because I know from the beginning of your book, you work with Facebook, the Gates organization, political campaigns, and obviously political campaigns want people to change their mind to go with whatever they're promoting. So you're obviously doing something right there. Now, Jonah, you mentioned in your book about the role of inertia. And I would never think of that word in the context of a book like Catalyst, but tell us what that means and where does that fit in?
Perfect. Yeah. And so I think it's important to take even a step back and start with change itself, right? Why is change so hard? And part of the reason is what you're talking about, inertia. There's research on what's called the status quo bias, which basically says, look, we have a tendency to stick with the things that we're doing already. We buy the same products. We use the same services. We vote for the same political candidates. You can see this very clearly if you ever go to a different grocery store than the one that you're used to. It's just a grocery store. You're still looking for the same products, but it's so much more difficult to find the stuff that you're used to finding. It takes so much more effort to often do something new. And so people often stick with what they've done in the past. And so when we try to change minds, whether we're a politician, whether we're a company, whether we're an organization, we often resort to some version of pushing. Right? We think I'll add more facts. I'll add more reasons. I'll make one more PowerPoint presentation. If I just tell people why they should do what I want them to do, they'll come around. And it makes sense why we think that, right? If we think about moving physical objects, I don't know, like a chair, for example, or a bookshelf that we're trying to move, pushing is often a great way to get it to go. We push it in the direction we want it to go, and it goes in that direction. And so we apply the same idea to people, but when we apply it to people, there's one problem, which is people don't just go the way we want them to. When we push people, they often push back. And so the book has a very simple thesis at its core, which is, often when we try to change minds, we ask a question, what can I do to get someone to change? And instead, we should ask a slightly different question. Why hasn't that person changed already? What's stopping them? Essentially, what are the barriers or the obstacles in the way? And how can we mitigate them? I think a good analogy is if you ever tried to start your car, this happened to me actually this weekend. So you get in your car, you sit in the front seat, stick your key in ignition, you turn the key, you step your foot on the gas. If the car doesn't go, we often think, I just need more gas, right? If I push on that gas harder, the car will go. Rarely do we look down next to us and go, wait a second, the parking brake right, is up. I got to depress that parking brake. And so what the book is all about is going, hey, what are those parking brakes that come up again and again? I interviewed, top performing salespeople and, child development experts. I talked to transformational leaders and hostage negotiators. I talked to substance abuse counselors and people and politicians and groups that convince people to switch sides. Again and again, I saw the same 5 barriers come up. And in the book, I put them in a framework called the REDUCE framework. And that stands for reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, and corroborating evidence. And each of those is a barrier that often comes up when we try to change minds. And if we understand those barriers and we mitigate them, we can really change anything.
Now, you make it sound so easy when you say that. You've done the hard work, the background work, but can you take us through those barriers and tell us, really what that is and how we can use them to our advantage, even if we're just trying to get our son or daughter to eat good food?
Yeah. So let's pick one and dive into it a little bit in depth. And you mentioned sort of son and daughter, and I happen to have both at the moment. Both are young. One just turned 3 and one is about 7 months old.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And the 7-month-old is not old enough yet to disagree with us, but the 3-year-old is quite old enough to disagree with us. And so, I think it's useful to talk about this idea of reactance, which is one of the first barriers in the book. And to help talk about it, I'll mention a story that some of your listeners might be quite familiar with. So everyone probably knows of these little square cubes called Tide Pods. You throw them in the laundry to do your laundry better, but you may not know the story behind them. So I'll tell you a brief sort of story about them. So Tide, owned by Procter & Gamble, wants to make laundry easier to do, and they want to make more money doing it. And so they realize there are a couple problems with laundry. 1, you never know exactly how much detergent to add. 2, it's sticky. And 3, it'd actually be better if some of the detergent went in earlier in the wash and some went in later, but you can't do that with just a liquid. So they come up with these things called Tide Pods that solve that problem. Drop it in the washing machine, solves all your laundry problems, spent over $100 million in marketing, and thought it would take a big chunk of the over $1 billion laundry market. So they released Tide Pods, and Tide Pods are doing pretty well, but then they hit a snag, which is that people are eating them. And I want to pause there for a second because I'm sure some of your listeners are thinking, what do you mean people are eating them? Aren't they filled with chemicals? There's no way people could be eating them, right? No, in fact, people are eating them. So there's a funny video on the website College Humor. There's a satirical article on The Onion. Soon, mostly young people are challenging one another to eat Tide Pods. It's called the Tide Pod Challenge. You guys might remember. And so what do you do if you're Tide in this situation? Right? You're sitting there going, oh my God, people are eating Tide Pods. This is absolutely ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening, but we've got to do something about it. So what do we do about it? So Tide released an announcement saying don't eat Tide Pods. In case that's not enough, they hire a couple celebrities to record public service announcements saying don't eat Tide Pods. And they think that will be the end of it. Okay, so if you look at the data, you see something quite interesting. Tide hoped telling people not to eat Tide Pods would at the very least stop people from eating Tide Pods, and maybe a worst case not have any effect. But it actually backfired. Tide tells people not to eat Tide Pods. Searches for Tide Pods go up over 200%. Visits to poison control go up as well. More people come in the next 2 weeks than had been in the 2 weeks prior. Essentially, a warning becomes a recommendation. Telling people not to do something actually makes them more likely to do it. Now, anyone who has a 3-year-old at home can probably attest that happens to you as well. You tell kids not to do something, they're more likely to do it. But it's actually much broader than that. Because even when we tell people to do something, that can make them less likely to do it. And essentially, pushing often backfires, right? When we push, people push back. Rather than going along, they go against us. And there's this idea of reactance where, people have a desire for freedom and autonomy. They want to feel like they're in control. Why did I buy a product, use a service, engage in a behavior, take an action? I did it because I wanted to. Right? But if I feel like I'm doing it because someone else wanted me to, because you told me to, mom or dad, because you told me to, boss, because you told me to, colleague, because you told me, marketer, in an ad, I'm less likely to want to do it. We essentially have like an anti-persuasion radar, almost sort of an anti-missile defense system that goes up when we see other people trying to persuade us. We ignore messages, we avoid them, or even worse, we counter-argue. We sit there thinking about all the reasons why it's a bad idea, right? If we're in a meeting and someone's making a presentation, we're not just sitting there listening. We're thinking about all the reasons why their suggestion won't work. It's too expensive. It won't work with existing processes. Or if it's a consultant, I don't want to do that particular thing. And so the key question that first chapter really talks about is, well, how can we reduce reactance? How can we give people back their freedom and autonomy rather than persuading? How can we get them to persuade themselves? How can we, rather than selling often, as we often do, how can we get other people to buy in? I'm happy to talk about a couple of the strategies that I mentioned there to sort of solve this problem, but that's really one of the key barriers, right? The fact that people don't want to do what we want them to do, and so we have to figure out a way to give them back their freedom and their choice.
It's perfect time for me to say it because I have to do what I'm told to do. And one of those is to let our audience know that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Jonah Berger. He is the author of the book Catalyst, a terrific book. Jonah, can you tell us where we can get it and if there's a website we should know more?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the book is available wherever books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, Audible, wherever you like. You can find out about me at my website, which is just Jonah, Jonah, Berger, BERGER.com. And there's a bunch of free resources there also. So if you like these ideas, but you're not yet sure whether the book is right for you, there's a one-pager. There's a guide about how to change your boss's mind or how to change a colleague's mind, how to change a client's mind, a bunch of resources to sort of play around and give you a better sense of the ideas in the book.
And again, I'll tell our audience, I've gone through the entire book. It's all marked up. Not only is this a very interesting book and helpful book, but it's also a great read if you're sitting in an airport and if you just want to be the most popular person as you're talking to the writer next to you or the person next to you, get a hold of the book Catalyst by our guest, Jonah Berger. Jonah, now you told us we've got a problem. We kind of know that people don't want to change. Children don't want to change. What can we do about it? You talk about the barriers to change and lowering them. How do we lower some of these barriers?
Yeah, so we just spent a couple minutes talking about reactance. That's an easy one. So I'll talk about a couple strategies. And one is what I call providing a menu. And so, imagine you're making a presentation at the office. So you're a consultant presenting to another team. You're, an employee presenting to your boss or the management team. Often when we present an idea we want people to adopt, we present one thing. Here's one solution. Here's one thing you should do. Here's the right course of action. But the problem with doing that is while we're doing that, everyone's shaking their head, seeming like they're listening, but they're not really listening, right? What they're doing is they're sitting there and thinking about all the reasons, as we talked about, that it won't work. And so what great salespeople do and what smart consultants do is they don't give people just one option. They give people multiple. Right? Rather than saying, hey, this is what I think you should do, you say, hey, I think this or this would be the best option. Which one do you think would be better? Because what you're subtly doing is you're changing the role of the audience. Right? Rather than telling them, hey, you should do this, which they're going to say, let me think about reasons I shouldn't do this. Instead, you've shifted their role. Now they're going, which of these options do I like better? Which makes them much more likely to choose one at the end of the meeting. You can think about the same thing even with your spouse, right? Often, or your spouse or a friend, pre-COVID at least, often someone would say, what do you want to do this weekend? And you might say, oh, let's go out for Japanese food. And they'd say, no, I don't want to do that, right? They think about all the reasons why what you suggested is a bad idea. But if instead you say, well, hey, we could go to a movie or go to Japanese food, now that shifts their job. Now they're thinking, well, hold on, which one of those do I prefer? Which makes them focus on those two rather than the dozens of other things they could do and makes them much more likely to pick one of them. I do this all the time with our 3-year-old, right? Rather than saying, hey, eat your dinner, I say, which do you want to eat first, your broccoli or your chicken? Which do you want to put on first, your pajama bottoms, your pajama top? He sits there going, oh, I get to choose. Which one do I want to do today? Which one do I want to do first? And he's focusing on that rather than all the other things he could do, like run around without his pants on and not listen to his dad, right? Because I've given him back that sense of freedom and autonomy. Right now, he has a choice to participate. And so that's just one solution for reactance. Another simple one, I think I talk about 4 or 5 in the book, but another simple one is asking rather than telling. Right. Again, too often, think about the current COVID situation that we're in. Too often we tell people what to do. Governmental organizations say wear a mask. Organizations say don't go to the grocery store. Do this, don't do that, which people don't want to do. But if you ask them questions, again, it shifts their role. Right? Because now, rather than going, I don't want to do what you're suggesting, they're going, well, what are the questions? What are the repercussions of not wearing a mask for my health? What are the ways in which this might be a good or bad idea? There was a boss I interviewed, I think, for the book. I'm not sure if this story made the book, but she was talking to her team. She's a startup founder, and she wanted them to work harder. What boss doesn't want their employees to work harder? But she was like, oh, you guys got to work hard. You got to work harder. You got to work weekends. And people going, no, thanks. I don't want to do it. So instead, she had a meeting, and rather than telling people anything, she said, hey, what kind of company do we want to be? Do we want to be a good company or a great company? And you all know how everyone answers that question, right? They go, we want to be a great company, a great company. She says, okay, well, how can we get there? And now suddenly, rather than thinking, well, I don't want to do what she wants, everyone's sitting there going, well, hold on, how can we get there? How can we be a great company? People come up with different ideas, and somebody suggests working harder, and somebody suggests another thing, and people suggest different ideas. And then later when she comes back and say, great, I think we should adopt that thing, this person suggested, it's much harder for them not to do it because they came up with it themselves. In some sense, they committed to the conclusion, right? Because they generated the idea, it's much harder for them not to want to do it. And so not only does it make action more likely because you increased buy-in, but it helps you generate some really good ways to solve that problem. Again, it's guiding choice, it's guiding directions, but it's not forcing people to do something, which makes them much more likely to go along.
Now, Jonah, you just explained how my wife has been getting me to do things for 40 years, and as well as how you can do it with children age 3, and that's that particularly difficult part of a child's life where they usually, no matter what you say, as you said, they don't want to put on their pants, they don't want to eat their dinner, and they don't want to go to bed a certain time. So if it works, that's probably the 2 hardest groups. If it can work with them, I think you've really hit on something. You mentioned that people strive for an internal consistency. Can you explain to our audience what that means?
Yeah, I'll give you an example to describe it. So it's actually, there's a fun story I tell in the book about an anti-smoking campaign in Thailand. And so there's this Thai Health Foundation. They want people to quit smoking. They're supposed to call a quit line to quit. Nobody's calling the quit line. Quit rates aren't going up. They're wondering what they could do. So rather than telling people to quit, which they've sort of decided, maybe isn't going to work. Instead, they have a very interesting campaign. So they walk around the city and they ask smokers for a light. And this is something that happens all the time for smokers. Someone else asks them for a light. No, not a surprise there. But what's interesting about this particular situation is the person that asks the smoker for a light is a 10-year-old child. A 10-year-old boy or girl comes up to a smoker and asks, can I have a light? And what does the smoker do? They say, of course not. I'm not giving you a light. You're a 10-year-old kid. Don't you want to run and play? Don't you want to be healthy? What about your lungs? Think about yourself. No, I'm not going to let you smoke. And so they list all the reasons why the kid shouldn't smoke. And at the end, the kid says, okay. But before the kid walks away, they hand the smokers a piece of paper. And on that paper, it says, you worry about me, but not yourself. Call this quit line if you want to quit smoking, and walk away. Okay? And what's amazing about this campaign is hugely successful. So 40% increase in calls to the quit line, videos about the campaign go viral, millions of views on the internet. But what's neatest about it is why it works, right? Because first of all, they're not telling smokers what to do. Smokers know they shouldn't smoke. In fact, smokers know more about why they shouldn't smoke than anyone else. They tell kids more of the reasons not to smoke than doctors would tell kids. They clearly have all the information. It's not an information problem, right? But they don't want to be told what to do. But what the child did, right, by asking them to smoke and the smoker saying no, is, as you nicely pointed out, it points out a gap between attitudes and actions. We want to be internally consistent. Right? I want my attitudes and my actions to line up. If I say I care about the environment, I better recycle. If I say, I'm a big Washington sports team fan, now whatever they call the football team fan, I better watch the games on the weekend and know the score. I want to be consistent. But when someone points out that I'm inconsistent, I do some work to resolve that inconsistency. Right? In this particular case, the child is just highlighted, hold on, I told that kid not to smoke, yet I'm smoking. My attitudes and my actions don't line up. The child highlighted a gap, and that causes what's called cognitive dissonance, right? I feel inconsistent, and so now I've got to do some work to fix it. I'm not going to go kill that kid to smoke because that's a pretty bad idea. So the only thing I can do then is sort of decide that maybe I shouldn't smoke myself. And the idea of highlighting the gap works all the time, right? Lots of examples of this. There was someone I was talking to an individual at a company who was trying to get a colleague to kill an old project, right? Something all of us have probably experienced. Someone's doing something, it could even be at home, right? Someone's doing something they've done before. They're always doing the same thing. It's not working, yet they won't change. And so this person did something interesting, though. Rather than telling their colleague, hey, you should change, they asked their colleague, would you recommend this thing we're doing to other people? Right? Yeah, it's losing money. It's not going so well. But hey, would you recommend someone else at a different company do this? And their colleague said, no, of course I wouldn't recommend somebody at another company do this. Based on what we know now, the money we've lost, we're sort of stuck in it, but I wouldn't recommend someone else do it. Well, then the person said, okay, but why are we still doing it then? Right? If you wouldn't recommend this to someone else, why are we still doing it? Not telling them what to do, but highlighting a gap between their attitudes and their actions. Same thing, right? If we're talking our personal lives and our spouse or our friend is doing something we don't like and it's counterproductive, well, ask them, would you recommend someone else do this thing? And if they say no, well, then suddenly they've got a problem on their hands, right? You didn't tell them what to do, but you drew their attention to some inconsistency in their behavior, which will encourage them to resolve it.
I would imagine your class has lines backed around the building. Am I correct?
I teach the marketing core at the Wharton School, so we have a number of students in it, and it's a great class. The students are wonderful, and I love interacting with them.
Because I'm learning so much here already, and again, it applies to 3-year-olds, it applies to 50-year-olds, and it applies to older people. And you just gave us the business example, Jonah. Before we go further, I'd like our audience to know that you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest is Jonah Berger. He is the author of the book Catalyst. And please do yourself a favor, get hold of this book no matter what business you're in, because we're all trying to get someone to change their mind. Jonah, can you give us the website where we can find out more about you and the book?
Sure, yeah. It's just Jonah, Jonah, Berger, Berger.com.
And again, it's not only informative, you'll learn a lot, but it's a good read. You'll enjoy it. And if you're like me, you're going to take the pencil or the marker out and be underlining virtually everything. Do a lot of us, Jonah, just fall into patterns just because we don't want to make a decision? Are we lazy about that? Do we kind of set in that mold?
I mean, it's certainly easier to do what we've done before. I mean, that's part of the status quo bias, right? It's easier to go back to the same grocery store. It's easier to buy the same product. It's easier to, use the same apps on our phone, take the same walk every day, engage in the same action. Inaction is a lot easier than action. Inaction is a lot less effort, both cognitive as well as physical effort. And so that's one of the reasons why we stick with what we've done before. Part of the challenge, though, right, is we often don't realize that inaction isn't as safe as we think it is. Right. So, we're talking a little bit about the endowment chapter of the book, but the fact that, people think doing what you've done is costless. It's not. I was talking actually to a cousin of mine who, every time he would write an email, would write out sort of, the salutation at the bottom. So regards, Charles, or best Charles, or whatever it was. And this sort of infuriated me because he's a busy guy, doesn't have a lot of time. And I'd be like, look, you're spending so much time signing the bottom of your emails. Why don't you just use, that in your email signature? And he said, oh, well, I don't know how to use email signatures, which is fine. I understand that. And it would take me a long time to learn. And he's right, by the way. It would take him a long time to learn. It would take him a few minutes, maybe even 10, maybe 15 minutes tops to learn, whereas signing his name each time doesn't take that much. It takes a second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds. But what he's ignoring is the fact that over time, that cost of inaction is actually very high. Right? He doesn't recoup the benefit of learning how to do it right away, but eventually he saves more time than it cost him. And so I said to him, hey, how much time do you spend writing each of these little things? It's only 5 or 10 seconds. I said, okay, well, how many emails do you write a day? He thought about it. He said, I don't know, 100 maybe. How many emails do you write a week? He thought about it. He said, maybe 500. And then I said, okay, well, then how much time do you spend each week writing these little email signatures? And he thought about it. And then he went to Google and typed in how to automate an email signature, because what he realized is, yes, right away, the cost of inaction was cheaper than the cost of action, right? It's cheaper right now to do something that's not ideal rather than take the cost of doing something that's more effortful. But even within the week, he recoups the benefit of taking that effort, right? And so, sometimes change is effortful. It takes a big step, and that step is costly upfront, but it often recoups the benefits very quickly. And if we can bring that to the fore, if we can highlight the cost of inaction, if we can make people realize that inaction isn't costless, now we've turned the tables a little bit and made them more interested in changing.
Are seniors particularly hard with this to work with? Because I'm thinking of a friend, I had just mentioned something he could do on the TV to DVR a show. And he said, oh, no, I don't know how to do that. And he just left it at that. And I know he's not a person for change. Is that a group that's particularly hard, or are they easier for you to work with?
You know, that's a great comment. And it's certainly true that seniors are hard to change. It is hard to change. What I find so interesting, though, is it's not only seniors. Right? It's not like young people are much faster to change, whereas old people are completely unwilling to change. There are some things younger folks are willing to change about, right? Younger folks are, better adopters, faster adopters of technology and some new things, and are interested in new technologies more. But in terms of, changing their food habits, changing their preferences in other domains, they're pretty in inertia prone as well as seniors. And so it's not that it's a certain demographic, certain cultural group, certain age. It's really all sorts of folks, whether young and old, all of them have this issue.
Is there an experiment you give your class or you yourself try with people just to show how some of these techniques work? Do you tell your students or even a friend, go out and try this or go do this and see how it works on some everyday, basically inconsequential action that we do?
Yeah, I mean, I often do workshops and consulting projects with organizations. And when I do that, I often start by saying, hey, pick a couple things you want to change. It can be in your personal life. It can be in your work life, whatever it might be. And think about something you've tried to do to change that thing. And what's super interesting is, almost all the time, basically 98% of the time, people come up with some version of pushing. More reasons, more facts, more figures, explain to them why they should do what I want them to do. And I find that particularly interesting because that focuses a lot on us. Right? It focuses a lot on us and what we want to achieve. This is the reason why you should do this thing that I think is a good idea, rather than really seeing it from their perspective. Right? And that, I think, is the first challenge to become a better catalyst, become a better change agent, is to really start by understanding the person you're trying to change. A doctor, you go into the doctor's office, the doctor doesn't start by saying, oh, let me put a cast on your leg. Right? The doctor starts by going, oh, let me understand the problem. And once I understand the problem, only then will I prescribe a solution. And so we need to be a little bit more like doctors, right? Or mechanics. We need to start by understanding the problem and only then suggest a solution.
I think that's amazing. And the mere fact that you can do this with both old people and the younger people, and as you said, with your child, that it works all ways. I would also imagine that if I was in your class, almost like the magician who can always pick your pocket, I would almost be afraid to talk to you because somehow you're going to get me to do what you want. So if I was in your class, I'd be that student who never comes up to talk to you because I would honestly be afraid. Jonah, before we wrap up, I want our audience to know our guest today has been Jonah Berger, Berger. He's the author of the book, The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind. Fantastic book, fantastic read. Do yourself a favor and get hold of it. Jonah, please tell us again the website.
Yeah, it's just my first name, lastname.com. You can also find me on Twitter at J1Berger, and the book is available wherever books are sold.
And remember, if he's good enough to deal with Bill Gates and the Wharton School, I think he can handle some of our problems and get us through things. Jonah, thanks so much for being with us today. We want to thank you for being with us on The Secrets of Success. And we want to remind our audience that you've been listening to the show on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Please join us again next week at the same time when we will continue our journey to success.